Welcome back. My name is Maxim Smith, and this is the White Pill Podcast. I've recently noticed some similarities after doing a bit of research on the Nazis and on the Hitler Youth. I've noticed some extreme similarities between Hitler Youth and indoctrination that we see nowadays in our own schools. And hopefully, when I go over these points, you'll probably see the connections between modern day indoctrination in our schools and the Hitler Youth indoctrination. Because after doing this, it's too similar. Children were indoctrinated at school. So the Hitler Youth camps basically schools were turned into Hitler Youth camps, and they were used to teach propaganda. Sounds similar? They also would chant anti-Semitic slogans. Of course, this was during the Hitler Youth camps, not today. But when you look at what kids do nowadays, they are being taught to chant slogans subconsciously, whether that's Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. They're all being indoctrinated to think that way and chant those slogans, which really have no meaning. And they're way too simple to have meaning because these are complex issues. And when you take complex issues and reduce them down to a slogan and then indoctrinate kids to just subconsciously chant that thing, then of course there's going to be problems and kids are not going to know what they're talking about. And that's what happened. Kids didn't know what they were talking about, and you can see today. Kids don't know what they're talking about, yet they go around calling people racist, calling people Nazis, which is kind of ironic given the fact that the indoctrination is very similar to the Hitler Youth indoctrination. Racist, Nazis, sexist, transphobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, like every name under the sun, they're taught to chant these slogans subconsciously. Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, like I said, and it's losing meaning. A lot of those words, racist, sexist, those are losing meaning because they're being used way too much. Children were told that the best thing they could do was listen to the Fuhrer, listen to Hitler, because he was God. He knew what was best for the country. That's what they thought, and that's what they were being indoctrinated to think. Nowadays, kids are being taught that the best thing that they could do is listen to what they're being told to do by their teachers. And, we see that a lot. It's very strange. I'm homeschooled now, but when I was in public school, for high school for just a couple of months, I found that these teachers pretend to be on the side of the students, and the students are indoctrinated to think that they are on their side as well. But then you look at it and you go, well, if you think that you're on the student's side, how could you do such an awful thing and try to indoctrinate them? It's very strange. By the way, the only reason why I'm comparing modern day indoctrination to Hitler Youth is because Hitler Youth is well known. It's a name that kind of everybody knows, basic history, everybody knows about the Hitler Youth. But Mao did the same thing. So I could have, if I did research into Mao and all of that, I could have compared it to the same thing. All of these big regimes of bad people indoctrinate kids in the same way, and they do very similar stuff. So I could have taken Stalin, Mao, Hitler, any one of them, and compared it to modern day indoctrination in our own schools. There was blind, unquestioning obedience, right? So you can't ask questions in class because you just have to be obedient. You do what you're supposed to be told by your Hitler Youth leader or by your teacher nowadays. And my principal wore a Black Lives Matter shirt, my teachers wore a Black Lives Matter shirt. So that should give a bit of an idea of how not great they were. And this is not an isolated event. This is all across the country. Indoctrination is widespread across the United States and in Canada as well regarding the Marxist indoctrination. Of course, other governments with public schools are going to indoctrinate kids other ways, but regarding the Marxist indoctrination, it's incredibly widespread. It's bad. Uniforms. When you were in the Hitler Youth, you had to wear a uniform. And that, to me, now you don't have to always wear a uniform when you go to school. Maybe you go to a public school that requires uniforms or a private school that does. Most don't. But now it's not a physical uniform, it's uniformity of thought. It's, okay, you have to think this way and you can't think this way. we all have to be uniform. We all have to think the same way. So the similarities are too eerily similar. It's very strange. If a uniform was incorrectly put on or dirty, then it was viewed as an attack against the state. This was for Hitler Youth. But nowadays, if you take the mental sort of not physical aspect of wearing a uniform and having uniformity of thought, then you can compare it to, well, nowadays at school, if you are not uniform in your ways of thought, then that is viewed as an attack against your teachers. That is viewed as an attack against this Marxist column that they built. I guess cathedral is what Michael Malice would call it. Uh, Social justice warriors. It's viewed as an attack against them. And by the way, if you haven't realized now, you better realize that social justice warriors, the ones that we were making funny social justice warriors compilations of just a couple years ago, are now teaching your kids to be terrible people. Just remember that. Not allowed to question anything while in school. So with Hitler Youth, they got embarrassed. Hitler was embarrassed by questions that were being asked. Kids would ask questions saying, "Well, if this regime, if the Nazis are so good, then why is my mom starving?" So they wouldn't allow any more questions after kids would ask questions like that because it would embarrass them. It would embarrass the Nazis. And if you ask questions in class nowadays that are embarrassing towards the cathedral, like Michael Malice calls it, I guess. I don't completely understand the idea of that, but I would need to have someone explain it to me a bit more. But the cathedral or the social justice Marxist people is viewed as if you can't ask any questions, and then they stop you from asking questions too. They really do. And then they would play war games, right? So with the Hitler Youth, they would actually do a lot of relatively fun stuff. At first, it would just be like a Boy Scouts sort of thing, and there would be things for girls, but not exactly the same as what the boys did. But it would be like Boy Scouts. You just kind of have fun. You would box each other. You would do all of this stuff. But then over time, the kids would be trained in, well, the kind of stuff they would need to do through war. Crawling under fences, crawling through mud, running really long distances, marching really long distances. Nowadays, you can compare that to the fact that teachers are saying, oh, you want to fit in with the group, so you have to become an anti-racist. And if you don't become an anti-racist and start calling out your own parents and potentially getting them in trouble for meaningless things, or getting them hurt because you call them a racist or something like that, then you're going to stay a racist. And the whole crowd's over here, so you have to be an anti-racist. It's this whole thing. And then they make it into a war game. They really do, saying, you have to go against your parents. You're smarter than your parents. You know more than your parents. That's what they're saying in schools nowadays. And it's kind of crazy. Another funny thing that I found out was that we have teachers unions nowadays, which are just awful. They need to be abolished. But in Nazi Germany, they had the NSLB, the National Socialist Teachers League, which just seems funny because it just seems too similar. It's just too similar. These groups of controlling, annoying groups of people that are overpaying teachers nowadays, because teachers, the majority of teachers nowadays are not helping anyone, and they're actually doing a lot of damage to not only the society, culture, but damage to individual kids, which if you want to be an evil person, then hurting kids is really evil. So a lot of teachers nowadays are evil, but yeah, that's just a funny thing I found out. The Nazis moved really quickly to indoctrinate kids. This was very important for them. If they didn't, then they wouldn't gain full control, because the kids are going to be the ones fighting the war. This was going to be for World War II. The older kids in Hitler Youth were being trained that they were going to be, so that they would be, very fit for the war, very ready for it. And a lot of the British soldiers did talk about how the Nazis seemed way more in shape and ready for war than they did, which made sense because Hitler Youth was to train them for war. So you could really make the connection between that. Kids are being trained to go to war against this traditional culture and to go against everything this sort of flag stands for, which is freedom. And even though our politicians, which are just not good people, wear this flag as a little pin on their shirt all the time, they do it to. It really seems like they're making fun of us and kind of trashing on us because they, at the same time while wearing the flag, they crap on it. But the kids are being taught to go to war against this, and I don't want to go to war against that. It makes no sense. So they're being taught to go to war. That's why, for years now, in the 60s, right? In the 60s, they started getting rid of teaching ethics in public school. They banned ethics from public school. Doesn't that seem a little weird to you? Seems like the war has been going on for longer than we thought. As if it was before I was born, way before I was born, before my parents were born, in fact. And just a couple years after my grandparents were born, this war started, where they started to slowly indoctrinate kids more and more. Teachers were also required to attend training camps, right? Doesn't that sound familiar? Because it sounds really familiar to me. Teachers nowadays, you see how, oh, they're going to these anti-racist diversity training classes where they have to learn how to be an anti-racist. And you can't just be not racist, you have to be actively anti-racist. Too similar. Public humiliation was a really big thing as well. If you weren't wearing your uniform correctly, you were humiliated in public, which is equivalent nowadays to if you're not in the uniform mindset, then you're publicly humiliated, usually in your own classroom by your own teachers or by the students that have been indoctrinated by the teacher. And this one's going to be crazy to you. This one's really, really crazy. It's too similar. And this makes this whole argument of Hitler Youth camps being related to public education nowadays, almost undeniable. The Nazis believed that kids should learn race science. They called it race science. Critical race theory and race science, same thing, except for the fact that kids in Nazi Germany were being taught that the Jews are out to kill you, they're bad, we need to eradicate them. Whereas nowadays it's the people who like this sort of thing or just want to be left alone, they're bad, we need to get rid of this culture, we need to eradicate it. It's too similar. Individuals were organized into races, right? So in Nazi Germany, of course, you had the Aryan race, which they said was superior to all others. Nowadays, there's a lot of, actually, in fact, black supremacy in schools. And I see a lot of kids that are black are treated differently from kids that are white. And kids that are white are shamed for some reason. Which, forget about the whole race stuff. That's so stupid. It's so stupid. But these teachers are kind of teaching kids differently on the basis of their race. If they're white, okay, we'll talk to you about how your founding fathers are terrible and how basically the system they set up was terrible, racist from the beginning. But you talk to these kids over here, which are black or Hispanic, and it's something completely nicer and different, like, oh, you're the future, but then to white kids, it's, oh, you're trash. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that's to show you that they're actually hurting kids. They're hurting kids. Young kids, too. And of course, Nazis believe that Jews and others were parasites and needed to be eliminated, which is the same thing as the people who are teaching your kids nowadays are saying, the people who like that flag, they're essentially saying, the people who like that flag need to be eradicated because they're bad people. They also encourage students to bully and harass Jews. So, of course, we don't have kids doing that nowadays, not really. But we do have kids being told to, and being encouraged, by the way, to harass and bully students who don't think in the uniform way. I've seen it too much. From elementary school to college. All through that. It's everywhere across the country. At least in the United States. That's what I'm mainly focusing on. But it's incredibly widespread. There was also propaganda everywhere in class. They did. One of the big differences between Nazi Germany and the indoctrination now is that The teachers nowadays are trying to actually weaken people and create weaker people, whereas in Nazi Germany, they were trying to make stronger, smarter people. And that's where propaganda was still a large part of Nazi Germany, Hitler Youth, and it's a large part of school nowadays. In fact, school nowadays is mostly propaganda. I was in school, when I was in public high school, just sitting here looking at my laptop all day because we can't actually go to school. It was almost always political, and it was very one-sided. I don't care if it's one-sided or not. I just don't want politics in the classroom. But that's propaganda. It's the main thing being taught in schools nowadays. There was also two of these quotes from Hitler. He said, quote, "I begin with the young, with them I can make a new world." And he also said, quote, "He alone who owns the youth gains the future." That should show you a lot. Unquestioning obedience was shown as better than individual thought. So being this group think, this uniform way of thinking, was shown in Nazi Germany and is shown nowadays to be superior to individual thought, to individuality, and individual thinking. That's what's being taught nowadays. And really, the purpose of this video is to try to compare Hitler Youth with public schools nowadays. And I know there's a lot of public schools that are good and that don't teach this stuff, that don't focus on politics, that don't indoctrinate. But there's too many that do. And it's hurting all of us. Because these kids are going to be, working on stuff in the future. And if you want them running things, you probably don't want them to be Marxist idiots running around all the time. The Nazis would also reduce complicated issues to slogans. So, like the thing I said at the beginning of the video, slogans were a very big thing that they would use, and the Nazis used it a lot. The Marxists nowadays use it quite a lot as well to reduce complicated issues to simple slogans, to make sure that people are dumbed down and can't understand the things that they're actually facing, the ideas that they're supposed to question, but instead they're not allowed to question. They also captured the emotions of the voter, because that's always important. We see that a lot nowadays. A lot of these Biden voters are tweeting about how upset they are that they actually got let down because Biden's doing everything he said he wouldn't do, and he's doing a lot more that's actually not good. So he just captured the emotions of the voter. Also, controlling the media was something that we see nowadays, and the Hitler Youth Nazi Germany used quite a lot. They would capture the media to put them in a good light, to always put them in the right, and they were always seen as doing the right thing, always, all the time. And they also presented the Jews as a physical threat, as if you could be attacked by a ton of Jews any day. Of course, that wasn't true. But you see that nowadays. In schools, kids are being taught that the people who think in their own individual way are a active threat, and we need to stomp them out. And if you think I'm exaggerating, not true. I've done a ton of research on this, over 120 plus, maybe something like 100 hours just looking at this stuff and talking about it. Obviously not on here. But it is so widespread, and it's hurting kids a lot. It's terrible what's happening to these kids, and it's widespread. We need to stop it. The last thing that I have for you is that there was a carefully controlled narrative, which I don't have to say anymore. It's way too similar. It's very, very strange how similar Hitler Youth is to modern indoctrination in our schools today. It's way too similar, and I could go on for much longer. If I did about an hour or two more research, I bet I could find at least 5 more points of how similar Hitler Youth was to, or is similar to, modern day indoctrination in our own schools, which, by the way, you pay for with your taxes somewhat voluntarily, which I just want you to remember that, because it's bad stuff. And if you don't want your taxes going to bad things, then try doing something about it. Take your kids out of school and public school. I've also seen this happen at private schools as well, so just watch out. The stuff is getting bad. Indoctrination's bad. And we need to fix it. We really need to fix it. So, thank you guys for watching. This is the White Pill Podcast. My name is Maxim Smith, and don't forget to like, subscribe, turn notifications on, and share, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.